Welcome to Modern Mindset, the show that picks the brains of the world's leading minds to help you unlock yours. Decoding the beliefs and strategies of global experts to give you an updated mindset to make the most of modern life. Hosted by the UK's most in-demand and highest-paid hypnotherapist, Adam Cox.
This is Modern Mindset, the show that picks the brains of the world's leading minds to help you unlock yours. I'm your host, Adam Cox, and joining me today we have Diego Cassina, who is an entrepreneur, he's a coach, and a nice guy who has gone on a bit of a journey. So Diego, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Adam.
Great to have you here. So tell us a bit about yourself. What do you do and why do you do it?
Well, I guess long story short, I like helping other coaches and other business entrepreneurs that want to sell through social media, essentially help them with their video marketing. So how do you craft a message in such a way that it lands in the ears of your prospect and turns them into clients? I'm fascinated by human behavior and how to connect with other people. I thought I was going to die alone. And so when I was younger, so I had to overcome a lot of social anxiety. And so everything that I learned out there, meeting thousands upon thousands of people to overcome that fear, I eventually turned it into a business. And so that's been quite fruitful and joyful, even more importantly.
It's something we share in the sense of that kind of social anxiety, the kind of the fascination yet fear of kind of connection and kind of what it means and that kind of stuff. What were some of the struggles that you encountered kind of earlier on in life that kind of led to that thought that you might die alone? Because I mean, that's a very heavy thought. Where did that come from?
I think incredible fear of the opposite sex, and so for me, it was just like when we talk social anxiety, it's essentially like, having the perhaps the intention or the desire to want to speak to somebody. And this happens at a young age, when you're middle school or maybe you're 13, 12, less, and then I would just start sweating profusely. I wouldn't be able to speak. I'd stutter. And it was all these things that I would then start having these negative thoughts saying, well, now you can't, and so I was super shy in every single one of my classes. I wouldn't speak up. And it was interesting because around the right group of friends, I could be quite vocal, quite social, but in situations that I felt uncomfortable in, there was fear there. I was a recluse. It would look like night and day, like two completely different people. So yeah, it really stemmed from a young age. I don't know any like originating incident, really. I had a couple things like when I was younger, I guess, but I wouldn't say that, that was the pinpoint. Of course, who's to know, but definitely felt it, up until I actually started practicing entering that fear over and over again.
It's an interesting quirk of human beings that people think that we are the way we are because of what we believe. But equally true is the other way around, that actually we believe who we are based on what we experience and what we do. So like you, I was a very anxious, nervous teenager, very shy. So I would evaluate my emotions and then say, oh, I guess this means that I can't do this or I'm not good enough to do that. So the beliefs came from me evaluating my own experiences, but then that sets up quite a disempowering loop. Whereas if you buy into an identity of you're a particular type of person, you do even less of the things, which gives you more evidence that you can't do it. And then before you know it, everything is a trigger for anxiety. What happened for you other than, as you said there, just kind of persistently going out of your comfort zone? What did you do to kind of change your identity? Because you don't come across like that type of person now. So was there a big catalyst or was it a gradual incremental progress in that direction?
Yeah, I'd say it was gradual. Of course. So by the time I got to college, I still hadn't dated anybody, right? And so obviously that's like kind of like a maturing that happens a little bit later than most. And so I'm in college. I go through a relationship and basically had to convince this person over the course of like 2 hours to date me. So that's not really how it's typically done, right? But after that kind of ran its course, I realized like, okay, I have to transform. Like this can't continue to go on. And so I started looking online And that's where I found, essentially all these people that had learned how to socialize. These are men that had gone out and met I don't know how many women, and they were giving their strategies, their skills. Now, that probably sounds really, really odd to a person that's just hearing this the first time, but you got to understand like where I was, like just how much I needed some sort of like, help, and so in that particular moment, I started looking at this advice, and it actually had a really positive angle, or at least the angle that I interpreted from it was to leave a person better than you found them. And so to go out there and actually face your fear, to meet women and actually connect with them and see what might happen of that. And so obviously I hear from all these men that are online that this thing works, and you overcome your social anxieties, and then now you can date whoever it is that you want to date. And so clearly that's a big promise. I start sharing that with a couple of friends. They all thought I was crazy, and it became almost like a bit of an addiction. So I just started studying this all day, every day. I started learning all about social. Read books on socialization, books on negotiation, books on any kind of human behavior, body language, everything. And then I would go out and practice, and I would go to the mall, I would go to the campus, I would go everywhere to meet people and see what I could do to further the interaction. At first it's as simple as saying hello with incredible nerves, and you're shaking, and afterward, you're sweating. I would remember I would walk up to somebody, and then afterward, it was my legs would shake, after the interaction. And I was found that to be fascinating. Anyway, but as you continue to progress, then you remember, oh, I remember now what that person's eye color was, or I might be in a conversation and I might make a little bit of a tease, and that's scary because you're constantly pushing into a discomfort zone. And then eventually you start to learn things about your own body language, because you're doing this, and you can have kind of like some kind of body sense to know, wow, I'm leaning forward quite a lot. Like, what does that imply about my view of this interaction? And so for me, that in itself was fascinating to kind of learn, hey, take it easy, like relax, like enjoy this. And as you go through this process, you start to, I wouldn't say devalue other people, but you reevaluate yourself. So that way it's interaction with another human being, and that's what it is. And you get to actually communicate who you are, rather than, the fear that you have of speaking to a person that you might believe to be higher on some pedestal that doesn't actually exist.
Mm. I think there's some really interesting, kind of principles to distill from that. One is that you had the self-awareness to know that, you didn't have the skills or confidence within yourself at that point in time to do what you wanted to do. Try and find someone or something that had a different blueprint that could get the results that you weren't looking for. But that willingness to go consistently outside your comfort zone, knowing that it's not going to be amazing just because you start, but kind of reflect and practice and kind of experiment, means you just get better and better. And I think that's a really empowering way of looking at things, because I think a lot of people, they have this idea of, if you're not naturally good at something, that's it. You should just never try that, whether it's sport or kind of human interaction or business. And in my experience, what gets you good is the willingness to take risks and the willingness to kind of go outside that comfort zone and do it until where you were uncomfortable before, then you're actually pretty comfortable. And then you get this kind of surreal thing, at least it was for me, where other people start looking at you because you're where they want to be. And you get this kind of really surreal, kind of like the chills down your spine. It's kind of like, almost like you're seeing yourself from a different perspective at a different time almost. And it's a magical moment. And then how did that evolve for you? Because it sounds like this was a key area that you kind of focused on. And then you get to a certain level of, competence and confidence in this area of your life. Did you go straight then into kind of this, video marketing, kind of specialization, or was it more that it followed a different journey for you?
It followed a different journey. I want to point out two things that just coming to mind that really helped me in this moment that you touched on earlier. Was one is identity. I think in that moment I started to change my identity to be the type of person that could connect with anybody anywhere. And then the other thing I think was realizing that a person is never rejecting me, they're rejecting my approach. And then that was something that I could then disassociate from myself and say, okay, I'm good. And so I could continue to improve this process, and that's what I then took afterward. Um, to move on to from that point, essentially I'm working for, I graduate college, I continue to practice and get better and more confident and more competent, I guess. And at that point I go, okay, well, I kind of want to do something with this. I remember going to a Tony Robbins conference, and I see him do a suicide intervention, and I'm sitting there in the audience, and I think to myself, like, that's what I want to do. I would love to be able to help people in this way. And I think to myself, okay, well, I don't have an audience. Number one, I um, I also don't know what I would speak about. And I thought to myself for a moment, I said, well, what if I just start talking about the things that I've been quite obsessed over, body language, connection, understanding human behavior, all these things that I had learned so much. And so I started posting online what became really just like a little video journal. It was me reminding myself of insights that had helped me earlier and things that obviously I needed to hear once again every so often. And so as I was posting this, I thought basically I would be speaking to men, because I had learned all these things. The way I describe it is like women taught me everything I know. And so I basically was just sharing insight that I believed would assist them in connecting with and courting and establishing a beautiful relationship with a woman. And well, it wasn't men that actually really moved my message. It was women. They heard some of the things I was sharing, and they rallied behind the message, and that ended up reaching some 7-8 million people that saw the content. And so then I basically, at that point, I was positioned as a relationship coach. Obviously now I teach people video marketing, but that's the originating kind of point where I go, okay, I guess I know how to connect with an audience online. I guess I know how to hook the person's attention and captivate them. It was all the same things that you would have to do if you walked up to a person in a subway platform or a cafe. You have to do 3 things. You have to hook the person's attention, right? So it's part of this is your approach. Are you in a good energetic state? So your approach is incredibly important. Then I would say the most important piece. Then after that is you have to captivate that person's attention all the way through the interaction. And then eventually you need to lead them to want to see you again. If you're on a subway platform and you have 3 minutes, that's no different from the moment you're on video and you have 3 minutes to capture your prospect's attention and hopefully lead them to your call to action. And so as I'm learning all these things in video, obviously I take up some coaches myself because I want to improve as well, and in my business. And I realized, I want to work with more entrepreneurs that are forward thinkers. And so I go, well, what do I teach? I don't know what to teach. I go, why don't you teach the things that you've been studying and doing? so then that became the video marketing.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. And I think that's a trap that a lot of people fall into, is that they contextualize their knowledge and say, right, well, that only works in this situation. And a lot of what I do as a therapist is mapping resources across from one part of someone's life to another part of their life. So you effectively did that from a career perspective. You said, right, you've got all this knowledge and framework and skills about connection and influence and interaction. What's another way of kind of distilling that same process to a one-to-many audience rather than a one-to-one audience? And video is boomed over the last couple of decades with YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and now TikTok and all this kind of stuff. Video is, I think, a very trusted form of medium because people get to see things like facial expressions and body language and tone of voice and all the kind of things that you would have in a real interaction with another human. And before we go on, because I know you've gone on a bit of a spiritual journey recently, but if you're gazing into your crystal ball, seeing what we've seen over the last, let's say, kind of 10 years in the realm of video online, where do you see it heading? What's your kind of predictions for the future in the world of video?
Honestly, I feel like it's going to go metaverse. I feel like much more of this will be, people will put on their goggles and then they'll have somebody beamed into their room. And so I think we're going to have much more of a need to understand body language as a whole, and the communication with another person that might be in a different city. So right now it's happening on a two-dimensional frame, which is your lens, your phone or your computer or your iPad. I think what we're going to see is much more of that happening three-dimensionally, and so whether that be through some avatar, whether that be, you being beamed into a room, that's already been done with, Tony Robbins has done that with a seminar of his. And so that for me is intriguing and interesting, and obviously like a whole nother world of exploration.
No, I agree. I think already, I mean, we saw it from the pandemic that very almost like effortlessly we transitioned to a world where we spend a lot of our interaction virtually speaking with other people. You're a few thousand miles away, and yet we're having a conversation that we could have if we were kind of in the same room. And I think, that's not a big leap to say, right, well, there's a two-dimensional image talking to a two-dimensional image. That could be a three-dimensional image. And then you can change not just kind of like who you are. You could be an avatar. I could be an avatar, but the location could be anywhere as well. And it kind of creates huge possibilities. But I think the essence of what makes one human connect with another human, it's the essence of, what's your intention, what's your energy, what's your, the authenticity of that individual communicating with another person. These are universal principles. They're not going to change just because the technology that we use changes. So it's it's a fascinating future. You've gone on like I said, a bit of a spiritual journey. What was the thought behind that before we get into the details of what you did and how you did it? What was the thinking that, there's more to learn here, or I want to experiment with something?
I think everybody gets to a point in life. I know, for instance, so I'll just talk about my experience. I had gone through a breakup, and that had pretty much rocked me to my core. And this was November of last year, 2021. And so at that point I go, okay, well, I need to do some changes in my life. So I hired a therapist, I did some hypnotherapy. And then I started looking specifically more. I wanted to, rather than focusing on the past, I wanted to kind of look into the future and say, okay, like what can I do to change things here? And I started looking basically at what I've been doing in my business and just in my life. And I thought to myself, it's this, it's kind of like this age old thought of maybe I'm not living to my full potential. Have I basically taken a backseat to my life? Like what else is out there? And I realized, I'm a smart guy. Like, I feel like I should be further along than I currently am. And so I was looking in the area of finances. I was looking in the area of obviously relationships as well, as that was current. I was looking at my health. But ultimately, I just felt like there was, kind of like I've always been drawn to like the adventurers of old. I thought, there's like so much experience and adventure out there, and I don't feel like I'm tapping in. And so that was, I'd say, probably the point. I felt like there was a lot of anxieties that I was facing in that moment, insecurities, both financially, entrepreneurially, as well as like relationally, and so I'm sitting in this whirlwind, and some of this stuff is just your interpretation of things that other people might look at and go, what are you talking about? But I guess when you're in it, when you're gripped by that anxiety, it becomes your entire focus. So I was in this place where I would wake up, I would say anxious. I wouldn't sleep well. I would at times like take naps during the day just to kind of like just from the overwhelm. And so in that particular place, I'm thinking to myself like, okay, I need to explore something different from what I've been doing, because I've done the self-help for so much time, but I couldn't get out of that mindset. As much as I knew to kind of like push myself out, it wasn't working, that push strategy. So I thought, okay, let me try something different.
Yeah. And then what was the thought there in terms of what that different thing was, and how did that come about?
I think for me, so there's so much that you can do, right? So that person can give you an instruction manual, say this is what you need to do in your business, in your life, in your health, in your relationships to get to this particular point. And I'd gone through that, I felt like I'd gone through that quite a lot. And, you know, I would say I pretty much commit myself really hard to those things. And so I thought to myself, what if there's something internal to me that, let's say it's just, some unknown trauma, some block, something that's holding me back. And so that's where I started looking internal rather than like an external strategy. And I tried doing that a little bit with self-help, and so at that point, that's when I said, okay, I want to kind of look internally more. That's when you and I ended up doing some work together, which was amazing, which was, hypnotherapy around this to kind of like remove some of the internal blocks that helped me move forward. And then of course, around that time, I also started hearing about from a friend who had gone through, his own journey, let's say. I'm happy to share if it's the right point in the conversation.
Totally. Yeah, go for it.
So, so essentially my friend he was going through a really, really, really challenging time. And I saw him, he mentioned that he had a therapist that had recommended mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms. And I thought, this is crazy because I had had a horrible experience, a recreational experience, some 15 years earlier, from the time that we're having this conversation. And it was a closed door to me, like never, ever, ever again. And so, but my friend, of course, his therapist recommends this. And I'm kind of looking at him like, who's this therapist? And so, but of course he was doing a little microdosing, which is, so for those that are new to this, psilocybin mushrooms are a hallucinogenic mushroom, right? So you ingest these mushrooms and you kind of go on a visual journey of sorts, and it can become spiritual if it's not recreational. Anyway, there's a certain dosage that you can take that will elicit these hallucinations. Call it 3 grams for the purpose of this conversation. A microdose is typically like 1/10 of that. So you're not actually experiencing any hallucinations, but you do get a lot of the neural connections that your brain will actually rewire. There's studies to this where you start to draw all these connections that you wouldn't otherwise draw. And there's been some evidence of people overcoming anxieties, depression. Anyway, so he was doing microdosing. I see his entire life transform faster than any self-help I'd ever read, any book. And so within 2-3 months, his life just seems like in order, and I'm looking at this from the outside looking in. So that's when I start, obviously with anything I research. So I start looking through all these journals, and I start looking through the experiments that are going on these days. So there's many, so for instance, there's one at Johns Hopkins University where they take these people who have lifelong depression that medications don't work. They have other people that have addictions, let's say like smoking addictions. There's others who have just anxiety. And there's a wealth of other studies, but ultimately they take these people, they blindfold them, and they give them a heroic dose of mushrooms, which is 3 grams is hallucination, 5 grams is you're seeing God. So they give them this 5-gram pill, and then they give them flight instructions. They essentially let them know that you might be seeing entities on these encounters. Don't run, because that'll just further edify them. And then you're basically running from something. Your entire journey. Don't fight them, because that'll also edify them. And now you're fighting this thing. Then they say, actually, just be curious. And so I found that to be interesting as well. Like, what are all these people talking about, these entities? Like, what? And they all have similar experiences, even though they're different parts of the globe, that they're seeing very similar things. This is weird. Anyway, but what really pulled me into it was obviously not seeing it as recreational, not seeing it as the experience that had scared me so much 15 years ago, but seeing this as therapy, seeing this as an opportunity to approach this with health, approach this, guided and therapeutically. And so I saw the research results. You're talking to people that have 90% of the participants that entered with the smoking addiction, when that was their intention to stop smoking, 90% had healed themselves of that addiction. And this is like even months and years later, they follow up on these people and they continue to stop smoking, or that they continued their journey without smoking. And so you hear these immense results, and I'm just like, it's almost like unbelievable, and of course, then I start hearing about this, not just from scholars, at Johns Hopkins, but I start hearing about this from other people that I'm fascinated by. Jordan Peterson speaks to this person who is running that research department. You hear Tim Ferriss is doing a lot of work to assist MAPS, which is an organization that is also looking into psychedelic research. And then basically the research also points out like just how much of your brain is connected. Parts that would never speak to one another are able to connect. And that gives you an opportunity to overcome traumas that, otherwise would be sitting there kind of like moving, kind of directing your life behind the scenes. Anyway,
I guess one of the fears that perhaps people may have about this, when you use the metaphor, like you're connecting parts of the brain that have been, let's say, closed or not communicating with each other, there might be a fear of kind of opening Pandora's box, that actually you open up these parts of the brain, or you reactivate memories that might be suppressed, and that actually you can't put it back in the box when it's opened. Based on your research, how kind of unfounded or founded are fears like that actually people can have bad experiences, or people can be traumatized by these, psychedelic journeys?
I think a lot of this has to do with three things: is your intention going into the journey, which is to say, like, what is it that you want to work on? So for instance, some people that have gone through these psilocybin assisted journeys, they do smoke, but that was not their intention. And so they end the journey, but they continue smoking because that was not the point of their focus. So that's one thing. The other thing is your what they call set, which is short for your mindset going into the journey. And so if you come into this with fear, which is where I would have been had I not done the research, then who's to say what that Pandora's box might open. But because I went and did the research, I saw just how much of this had turned into positive experience for people. For me, I had a much better approach going in. Seeing it as therapy rather than recreation, seeing it as something that would help me rather than scare me, that was highly beneficial. And then the third piece is your setting. And so that's to say, where are you doing this, and how are you doing it? For me, I did this as closed eye processes. So you're actually having an internal experience rather than an internal hallucinatory experience. And the setting was also one where, I wanted to do this. I wanted to do this the right way, guided with some sort of healer or a therapist or guide, somebody that's essentially guided others in this journey. And so it came at the perfect moment. I'm in Colombia at the time, and a person that had been following my content for quite a long time, and I'd been following hers. We ended up meeting each other, and as we're speaking, she basically, I think I'd already known that she essentially guides people through, spiritual journeys, let's say, using plant medicines. And as I'm speaking to her, I just feel like this immense love pouring forth from her. Like she's just like a white light. And obviously I had some fears there still. Like I'm fearful of the bad trip. I'm fearful of opening Pandora's box. Like I'm fearful of like not coming back the same way. And she basically allayed all those fears just with her energy. Like she's literally, when I described like pure love, like that is what I felt from this person. And the way that she described it, just kind of like, these are like, you're kind of like evoking like a kind spirit through the plant medicine. Like it is really the energy of love. And the way that she just described it and all these other journeys, like I just felt like so supported in that, if they say you don't go searching for plant medicine finds you. And so in that moment, I knew. I was like, you know what, let's do it. And so that was when I booked the first guided journey, knowing that the setting would be good. And
And
so, yeah.
talk us through that first journey that you went on. What was what did you take, and what did you experience?
Yeah, so I've had two now journeys, but the first one was so I go to this person's kind of like they call it a finca, but it's essentially like this beautiful home with an outdoor area, just like butterflies and flowers and trees. It's just absolutely gorgeous. Anyway, so I went out of town to this particular location. Myself and another person that I met there that was also bee guided, and we had two guides. She was one, and then a male was another. So it was kind of interesting to have that energetic dynamic. Anyway, we so the journey begins with us just sitting down, kind of describing what our intention, why we're there, and you kind of rewrite that down into a piece of paper, just to have it very clear, like what are the things that you want to be working on. Then essentially we have some orange juice, which so you haven't eaten anything for some 9 hours or so prior to this event, right? And so it's early morning, so you're quite hungry. But so what you have is they give you an orange, or they cut an orange, or they give you orange juice. The reason for this is orange is representative of the sun, and so the sun being kind of like the father figure. And so now I'm describing this as very spiritually, right? So there's the father figure, and then we also drink cacao, which is the mother figure. And so what the sun does is kind of like it basically like opens up, or the orange juice, it basically opens up to receive more of the I believe the psilocybin chemical. But then cacao, has been used in spiritual journeys to open up the heart. And so protected by both the mother and the father in the spiritual kind of experience, that now mushrooms which are the spirit, as they say, of children, because you do kind of experience this like imaginative, exploratory experience. They feel protected then to kind of, release everything that they need to release for you. Mm-hmm. And so at that point as well, we did rapé, or rapé, I believe it's also called, which is a Brazilian authentic, like kind of like an ancient tobacco. So it's a powder that they essentially blow into each one of your nostrils. This serves to decalcify the pineal gland, and basically at that point you close your eyes, and for some 10 minutes or so, like I've done that now 3 times, guided each time, and it was a small dose, although in the Amazonian forests, and they do take larger doses. But yeah, in that moment, I just had this like immense feeling of love pour through me. Like I just felt like this incredible connection to the planet, and in that moment, I remember like my right eye start to tear, and I'm like, is that water? Like, what is that? And it was interesting because I personally, like, I haven't cried much in my life. Like I could probably kind of count on 2 hands the number of times I've cried. It's probably like 7 or so at the point of this journey. And so I'm like tearing. I'm like, what is that? I was like, what's the salty secretion coming from my eye? And so, but it felt absolutely beautiful. And so what that does, it decalcifies the pineal gland, as I mentioned before. And this is what they typically associate with the third eye. And this is also what they believe is where DMT might reside in the human body. DMT is dimethyltryptamine, which has also been been used to create these, spiritual journeys. Anyway, at that point, then we are presented with the mushrooms. 2.8 grams is the amount that I took that day. And, you eat these things slowly, and they've already kind of like ushered you in through what the experience might look like. And at that point, you put on your blindfold and lay back, and they start to play this music. So they start with the drums. They start with, this chanting. They've been trained through shamans, so you're hearing kind of like, the shamans doing their work. and then you essentially you start you essentially start seeing things, so that's the beginning of the journey.
What kind of things did you see? And because I imagine, like, I mean, I've never done like any kind of hallucinogenics or kind of anything like that. But what I have done is obviously lots of guided meditation, and I've also used one of these light treatment machines that kind of has pulsating light in particular patterns. And the human brain has this amazing ability to kind of find meaning in anything, even if it's random lights. You can turn that into a forest or a journey and that kind of stuff. How was your experience? What did you see? And was it literal things, or was it more patterns that you had to kind of turn into meaning yourself at some level?
So I've had two journeys now. The first one was 2.8 grams. The second one was the heroic dose 5 grams, in an effort to replicate what the studies look like at Johns Hopkins University. In the first experience, I was more, I almost felt like I was cultivating the experience. So I was like thinking about things, trying to lead, my journey myself. And then eventually, so my first intention was trying to essentially like get better with my business. I wanted my business to be performing much more effectively. And in that first journey, I didn't really, I guess, yeah, it's difficult to describe. So the first journey, I very quickly started to focus on my ex-girlfriend, and I just started crying profusely, like missing this person immensely. I think that was like the Pandora's box. It was almost like, the way I describe it is as though the mushroom said, I know you want to work on this thing for your business, but this is what you need to work on first. And so I'm just releasing, crying. Again, as I mentioned before, I'm not a person that typically cries. And I think at that point I became comfortable with crying. And so essentially I let go of pain that I had. And I came to realize afterward that, what I noticed was, oh, this pain wasn't associated with this ex-girlfriend. It was something that I've been carrying for some time, this sadness I've been carrying. And so what happens then is, like, the way I describe the visions that show up, they're not, like, you want the answer to a question. And so when we're talking as human beings, there's a logical discourse, and then you arrive at some solution. But this is not that way. It's presenting visualizations, as you describe, and so then you have to interpret the meanings yourself, and so it was very much that way in the first journey as in the second one. And the second one, I'm seeing, like, all of a sudden I start to see like light flutters on my left and right plane. It's like, and then all of a sudden I'm gone. I see, pyramids with eyes in them. I see, fractals. I experienced the egoic death that people are so fearful of, which is like, you're no longer there. And I experienced the universe, in having conversations with infinite intelligence. I know this sounds absolutely crazy, but it feels very, very real to me. It felt more real than this is real. Yeah. So it's interesting. Like, one thing that you have to do is let go and let the journey take you. And when you do let go, there is an element of trust and faith. And when you have that, you're less inclined, I believe, to experience, the theoretical bag trip. But yeah, I mean, I can describe these like more in depth if, because these two experiences are so different. To try to combine them into one is very difficult.
Yeah. So, I mean, go into as much detail as you want. So the first one is kind of a lower dose, and you're kind of almost the narrator or the architect of your experience. But I get the impression by you saying that the second one, you're not the one driving the bus. Like the experience is, you're almost like a passenger on that kind of journey. Give us an idea of what happened on that heroic dose that you took.
Sure. So the heroic dose, so the first thing that I see, so that one was also like wanting to have much more abundance in money, wanting to have a better work ethic, like a stronger work ethic. Like that was my intention essentially going in. The first thing that I see is the back of the dollar bill. I don't know if like your viewers might be able to see this, but on the back of the dollar bill, like I don't know why this popped up, but there is a pyramid and there's an eye at the top.
Yeah.
And this is the first vision that I got. And then afterward, I started, I think assisted by the music, I started to feel as though like I'm seeing all these different colors, and then there's a sound of almost like this. I'm hearing sounds of like prehistoric like dinosaurs, and I don't know why, but my all of a sudden I felt as though I was an emotion. And it was the emotion of wanting to break up two people. And obviously that's not a, beautiful or loving emotion. And it felt almost as a leaf, like I was falling and floating to the floor. And literally, like I felt like this emotion had consciousness to it. And I was all disfigured, and when I describe, it's crazy to describe an emotion to having consciousness, but I could feel what it felt like to be this emotion. And I also felt that nobody wanted to come anywhere near me, because obviously like what emotion, who would want to be around that emotion? And so I was there for like what felt like thousands of years before the universe essentially like forgave me and I became this tree. And so the next thing, of course, is I become this tree, and I'm, giving life. Birds are resting on me, and I feel that there are some dinosaurs in the distance, but I just felt like this grand, majestic, prehistoric tree. And so I'm experiencing these things. I'm feeling that my consciousness is still there, and then of course I think to myself, and then I switch again. I become like the back of a patch of hair on the back of a llama. I don't know why. So anyway, I had an insight or a question here at this point. I go, well, what do you, how is this supposed to help me with my intention? I was asking essentially. And they say, well, when you have a pain on your body, what happens is you put focus on that part of you, to try and heal it. And I go, okay. I say, well, I guess I'm hurting right now then. And they say, yeah, that's why you're here. We've put our attention on you. And so then I'm kind of like, well, what? And I say, yeah, but I understand that I'm hallucinating right now. I understand that I'm on the floor, at this, outside, and that I took mushrooms. And so I understand that this is just a trip. I've been, I would say, agnostic at times. I'm a person of science. I studied engineering, 2 degrees in that. So I'm very much, I would say it takes a lot for me to like fully believe something. Anyway, so I'm sitting there on the edge of this, and then that's when I experienced the egoic death. It was, well, how do you know you're, I said, I know that I'm alive right now. And the response that I received back was, what's the difference between alive and die? And like, what's the difference between life and death? And it was this kind of like this counterpoint. And they say, who's to say that you haven't already died? And I'm thinking to myself, well, what? And they say, how can you trust these people? How do you know that you haven't taken too much? What if you have already passed away and this is all just the afterlife?
Wow. How do you deal with that?
Oh man, that was that was interesting.
There's Pandora's box, and then there's another dark box inside Pandora's box, because then you're thinking, maybe I'm dead at this point. That's
yeah, and that's like a one that, I mean, you can, those are one of those points that you can argue either way. And I think at that point, having known the importance of letting go and stepping into what might feel fearful, I think was incredibly helpful in that moment, because I felt that little panic come on. And I said, no, like I have to dive into this. And I said, okay. And I just like accepted it. And it's a lot easier when you're on the journey, although from the outside it might feel like, oh my God, that sounds like terrifying, mortifying. Anyway, at that point I accepted, and I felt like my body then like passed through a black hole. Like I was just stretched and like snapped into a bunch of different pieces, and then all of a sudden I was no longer there. It was just my consciousness. And at that point is when, I believe it was at that point, there's a lot of, pieces to this, but at that point I started to see fractals, just repeating patterns over and over and over again. And as well at that point is when I believe I met what is infinite intelligence in the universe. Again, as I mentioned, I was agnostic at times in my life. I've been atheist, and then I'm sitting here having, a conversation with something that manifested itself visually in my frame of reference, so I could understand it, so I could converse with it, and that's what I believe to be that entity, or an entity. People have mentioned they see entities of various sorts. Some people say they see mechanical elves. Some people say they see, some sort of a loving presence, or aliens, or I don't know what they like. And who's to say that these things that people see are what we perceive? Like when a person says mechanical elves, it's like that. It sounds like a couple elves that are made out of metal, but I don't quite know what that actual visualization would be for a person when they describe that,
Yeah.
because you really do see certain things, and then you afterward you say that's what that was. Anyway, yeah. So I believe I started speaking with an entity, and that entity I believe to be essentially like the energy or the infinite intelligence of the universe. And it was, Adam, it was absolutely gorgeous, dude. It was.
It sounds like a magical moment. And, at that point you're meeting the oracle, the all knowing, about everything. And did, obviously you're not in the conventional state that you might be, now, for example, like fully conscious. In that moment, are you thinking, well, hold on a minute, I've got a once in a lifetime opportunity to speak with infinite intelligence. I want to know this, or give me this resource, or whatever it might be? Or is it just being in the presence is enough, and you just kind of feel some kind of energy or something?
I'd say it's more the latter, but you can ask questions, or at least I felt that I could. And so I would kind of bring this back to my intention, and my intention felt so small compared to, it's like, here I am, speaking to this infinite intelligence, like having the opportunity to ask whatever question I might ask. And I'm like, so, like, what should I be doing with my video marketing? It's like, come on, and so it was almost like playfully, it'd be like, and lovingly say like, we'll get to that. There's other more important things to show you. And so for me, the question that I guess that came up from, well, it's not, it was like an knowing, and so at that point I'm speaking to this. What essentially happened was I recognized that this is, they call it God, call it infinite intelligence, infinite love, whatever it is that the oracle. And so I came to realize that I knew that there was somebody that was next to me in this journey, which was in the real world, and like I could feel their presence still in my journey. And I go, and at that point I go, like, what I realized was that we're all part of this, and so what the realization that came through was that, like fractals, like repeating patterns, that this person that was next to me is a repeating pattern of me, and that we all repeat up to this grand universal energy. And so we're all part of this, we're all connected to this, this thing. And I go, and it was like this beautiful sense of love. Like I felt like, if level 100 is the typical amount of love that a person feels in their lifetime, is like, I'm feeling like 110, 120. I felt like my heart was going to burst out of my chest. And it's just like pure infinite love. I'm probably crying in the real world this time. I don't know, but there's this sense of like infinite connection to this thing. And the way I describe it is almost like, if you were to look at, how is it that we connect? It's like, no, this is just a fractal, like you are the same. And so the way I describe this is, if you look at a three-dimensional box and you were to cut that box and look at it from the top down, you would see a square. Like any thin frame of that box would perceive itself to be a square, when in reality, it's part of this box.
Mhm.
And so in that way, we each believe ourselves to be, this human being with, this is the confines of my experience. And what this kind of revealed to me is like, no, there's like so much more connection, that you're perceiving things out of a dimension that is not letting you see the bigger dimension.
Yeah. And that was going to be one of the things that I was going to ask about, because there is this theory that in some ways, we're only able to comprehend our reality through the lens in which we experience it. In the same way that if you've got fish in a fish tank, that's their reality inside that fish tank. And even if there's a room outside of the fish tank, they'll never know what that is, let alone the wider world beyond the room, beyond the fish tank. And there is a theory that actually what we're able to experience through, let's say psychedelics, is the fish getting a glimpse of the world outside its fish tank, if that makes sense, like different dimensions, different frequencies. Did that feel like what was happening to you, or did it feel like something else?
Yeah, definitely. It's very much like that, and to use your fish analogy, it's the same thing with bats. Bats use hearing to see,
Mhm.
essentially, or snakes that use, thermal heat, like heat map their environment. And so what this does is you can actually see your brain in a normal, call it sober state, and the amount of connections, the amount of your different parts of your brain that are actually speaking to one another. Whereas in this case, your brain is like hyperactive, and so that's why you might have synesthetic experiences. You might see sounds, you might hear colors, and so in that way, yeah, absolutely, you're starting to sense your environment much more differently. I remember there was a point when a person was speaking to somebody else, and so essentially it was one of the guys that was speaking to a person that was on what I felt was a bad journey. And the way he was speaking to this person, I could feel like the words. So you and I are talking right now, but I felt it was almost like a person had opened up, like the vocal communication, and it felt almost like a box of Pringles, like, I don't know, or a bat, I don't know if you've ever seen like like chips stacked upon one another,
Mhm.
that's just like
Yeah.
repeating patterns. So it felt like repeating patterns or fractals of communication, that embedded within that was the universe as well. And I could see it, I could feel it, I could experience that, and which is, obviously something that we don't experience in our day-to-day life, so who's to say if that's something that is present, but kind of like, let's say, repressed for us to, function, or if that was, some sort of spiritual journey that, it was hitting some higher level reference.
Mm. And obviously through these experiences, um, you went in there with intentions. You went in there with a particular idea of how you wanted things to be different in the future. Um, and is that something that happened, or actually did you change, or is your life on a different trajectory, not necessarily linked to your intentions, but it's just different anyway, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I say it would. I'd say it is. Right at that moment when I'm speaking to infinite intelligence, I feel that I'm super connected to, that. There's an insight that comes through in that moment, and it says, yeah, well, you're God too. And that was really fascinating to me, because it's not like an egoic kind of like, oh, like flex yourself, you're God. No, it was love. It was like, you have the power of creation as well. And so that was the beginning of the latter part of my trip, or journey, where um I start hearing, uh I essentially I start hearing one of the guys, the female, she sings, and I hear her singing like, you're inside me, God, you're inside me. And I'm feeling like a sexual energy. I'm thinking like she's trying to like court me, like what is this, and And what I came to realize afterward was it was the moment of my conception. And so I'm conceived again. And then what I see is the next thing I see is a falcon that gives me an eye, which, if anybody's familiar with the Egyptian tradition, this is the eye of Horus, and so this is well documented. And essentially it's, vision is given back to a person that has lost sight. And so that's the first thing I receive. I mean, I'll go past it a little bit faster, but I essentially start being rebuilt. The next thing I'm given is a wolf's fang, which is sharpened by love, and essentially in that moment, I had to experience a little bit of I essentially had to learn how to defend myself and protect others. That was a little bit scary at that point. Then afterward, I was given skin. I was given a backbone to protect, to essentially to protect the feminine and to also stand for myself. And I start to rebuild slowly, piece by piece, to the point that, I have heart that innervates everything. And then I start breathing. I'm like, oh my God, I'm breathing here. Like, what? Oh my gosh, I'm breathing. And then I open my eyes, but I see the blindfold and I go, well, I'm so scared to see what's outside. I want to open my eyes, but that's a hallucinogenic world. I've never experienced this world before. Like, what might it be like to, take this blindfold off and actually go out there in the universe? And I realize I'm like, oh, this is my rebirth. Like, I have to open my eyes. I have to do this. I have to. So I open, the music had stopped by this point. I open my eyes, I turn, and I take the blindfold off. I look and I see both my guys just sitting there, like in the most loving energy I could have experienced. They're just both looking at me, almost like a mother figure and a father figure. And so what happened then was I go through, I'm trying to explain what I was experiencing. I couldn't even talk. I'm like, oh, I understand what's going on. I'm learning how to talk, Then I go through adolescence or exploration. So yeah, there's a pool, not too heavy, not too big, so that you want to drown, but you go in there, you can float, and I'm seeing the clouds, I'm seeing birds, I'm seeing everything. And then after that, after this exploration phase, it's funny, so I'm soaking wet because I jumped into this pool with clothes on and everything. So I come back outside and I say to my guide, that was amazing. She's like, why don't you go out in the sun? And of course, like, she's like a mother figure to me, in this journey. And I go, no, I'm an adolescent now, and I don't have to listen to what you say, and then I'm like, oh, well, I'm going to go outside, but it's going to be my decision. So it's very much like me going through the teenage years. I go outside, I start to educate myself with like the things I'm seeing. So I'm going through this entire experience. I thought I was going to go back to all the way to old age and death, but I arrive at adulthood, and that's where my journey ended. And for me, that particular point was, how I interpreted the experience. It was, well, you want to have the work ethic, you want to be responsible. Well, you're an adult now. And so it was almost like understanding, like, maybe I was trapped in an earlier developmental stage. And so I developed all the way through to adulthood. But yeah, I've used those intentions. I mean, like, I still receive some of the insights. You're still integrating things for a while afterward. You forget things as well. So, but yeah, since then, since both of those experiences, I don't have the anxiety that I had before. So I can sleep better. I wake up without the anxiety. Business has improved. I feel much more love and connection to the universe. Like, sometimes I'll be walking, listening to some music, and I will literally start like just tearing up from like that connection to the universe, to that love. Yeah, and I've also had just some crazy experiences since then as well, where I like, there was a song that I listened to after my first journey that, I don't know, for whatever reason, after years of not having heard it, I started, it showed up on my music list. And so I'm listening to this, and I felt like that connection to that love. I was like, man, this is like, there's something about this song. And so I'm listening to this. Of course, there's no lyrics whatsoever, right? The name of the song is Goriella Anahera. It's an electronic music song. And so the next journey that I have, at some point it says, yeah, we were communicating to you through that music, through that song. I'm like, what? And so afterward, I go, okay, well, like what was this? So I obviously I want to hear it again. I load up the music video on my computer, which I hadn't seen in years, but I remember it was quite beautiful. And it says, everywhere in the universe there's a fingerprint of an infinite creator. There's an infinite intelligence. And I'm like, what? Because there's no lyrics, but it is on the music video.
Mm.
I was thinking to myself, what are the chances of that? And I go, what if I just what I never thought to see what Goriella Anahera means. Well, I looked it up. Goriella is the pen name for this artist, and Goriella means heavens, and Anahera means angel. I'm like, what are the chances of this? And there's so many things that previously I would have called coincidence, that like now it's, you choose to make what you make of it, right? And so there's so many of things like that you start to go, what if what I experienced was actually 100% real? Right? And that is what this is, So yeah.
I'm getting flashbacks of the scene from Limitless where he kind of takes a pill, the NZT, and then suddenly his brain is kind of firing on all cylinders. And, I get a sense of that for you. It kind of opened up parts of your brain or your mind that you wouldn't normally have access to. What kind of time frame, in let's say in reality, were these two journeys, and what did it feel like when you were actually in them?
So real time, it's 6 hours or so. In the journey, time is distorted heavily. You can't make sense of time. As I mentioned, like there was an emotion that I felt that I was, and it felt like I could be there for thousands of years. But yeah, time is heavily distorted. This is the experience that most people speak about, that they feel like any particular part of their journey could be quite a long time. That sounds perhaps even fearful to some people. It's like, well, what if you go sideways, Mm-hmm. But I found that, again, like going with, having that right intention, the set and the setting, like you enter that space and you're, it's loving, and I don't know, like I didn't have a negative experience. I did have one point that I did have a panic attack. I'm happy to speak about that.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, yeah, time is distorted. You can't make sense of time when you're in there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it does seem like there's similarities with certain hypnotic phenomenon, because it's an internal subjective experience. You've got no clocks and time, like where you are, is kind of however it seems like it is. So yeah, a moment can feel like years, and years can feel like a moment. So yeah, tell us about this panic attack. What was the trigger for that, and how was that interpreted while you're on this journey?
Yeah, and just to touch on what you mentioned, because that's that's the experience that I had when we were doing our hypnosis sessions. Is like I remember something that I'm thinking that I'm like, man, I felt like that was 15 minutes, and then afterward I see the real time was like 45 minutes, but I'm just so visual. And then other times I felt like, man, this is like I've been in this experience for the full day, and I come out and it was, no, that was just like a 30-minute thing. So yeah, that is really, really fast. I'd be interested to know if perhaps like DMT is released through a hypnotic session. But anyway, to the question that you just asked, which is the panic attack, there was a moment when I was, in that infinite intelligence and, in the universe. And I'm exploring the universe at that point. I'm like, show me the oceans, I see the oceans, show me the planets, show me the stars. And of course, then a question, of course, comes up, which is, how did ego make its way into the universe? Like, how did fear make its way into the universe? And, because fear, I came to realize, is an earthly phenomenon, not a universal one. I attribute love to being a universal energy now. And so for me, you can always tap into that, and it's a much higher level reference frame anyway. But that particular moment when I asked this question, like, how did ego make its way? And what I noticed was love was like what I was experiencing in the universe. And then all of a sudden the entire plane of reference just flipped upside down. And what was very beautiful colors all of a sudden became very like dark colors. And it almost felt like these weird, I don't know, like, I don't know if you've ever seen like people are dropping ink into a glass of water. And so you'll see like these like bubbles
Mhm.
being formed that are black. So it felt like this very dark, heavy energy. And it was, to me, the way I felt it was almost like it was the same molecule of love, just flipped upside down.
Mm.
And that was the panic attack. It was like, oh my God, if this is what is the base of love, like I can't then, like, all of a sudden my understanding of love and everything that I have understood so far is like, I don't want to experience that kind of love.
Mm.
And um and then the music started to shift. It was really fascinating how much the music would guide me. I thought these guys were playing the music, and I even like kind of questioned this God, and I said, and he's like, you think these people are playing the music? He's like, I'm the DJ here. And of course, like the music would change as it needed to anyway. So at that point, I'm feeling this panic attack. Like I'm starting to get like really scared. And because my essentially like at that point is, I mean, it's kind of like feeling like an earthquake. Like the mores of your reality have started to crumble. Like now everything that you've believed up until now is a complete lie. And so I'm feeling this, and at that point, this one word comes through, and it was choice. And that for me was a moment when I realized that every single one of us has an opportunity to enter the energy of love or enter the energy of fear, or call it ego, whatever it is that you want to call it, at any point in our life. And so which do we want to be contributing toward? And so that was really, I don't know, like fascinating for me, because it's ultimately, it's up to us. We have free will, we have choice. So yeah, so that was kind of the point where as soon as I heard that, then I got back into, I guess I chose love.
Mm.
Yeah. And I
Amazing.
started feeling better. Yeah.
And that kind of got you out of that kind of rocky bit when
Yeah.
you kind of made that choice there. And one of the fears, I guess, that people have, because some people will put everything into the category of, okay, these are drugs. So whether it's kind of recreational drugs, medicinal drugs, and anything at all. And there is a feeling that once you've experienced something, whether it's kind of pleasurable, insightful, there's going to be this kind of desire to experience it again and again. Did you feel that after you kind of had this, that this is something you're going to do again and again? Did you feel like it could potentially create the possibility of an addiction, or not at all?
I mean, I think people can make that argument, because you can say, well, look, Diego went once, and then a couple weeks later he went again, under the spell, and so that you can definitely make an argument for that. Although I can tell you that I don't actually feel that way. I feel like there's so much integration that has to happen post in a journey like that. The first time I felt like I was addressing a relational challenge. And afterward, that's what really led me to a point where I felt like absolute bliss and absolute love. And that definitely I integrated into my business afterward, um, to work with that intention. But the second time I felt like I really wanted to experience the heroic journey. I want to experience what the Johns Hopkins studies have mentioned. And so that time, after that time, that's been now like a little over 2 weeks now. I maybe the sample size, maybe it's too soon to tell, but I don't feel this need to go return to mushrooms. And I've heard this to be the case for many others. Is like, you have quite a harrowing experience, and
Mm.
afterward you have to integrate it. They've done studies with mice, and who's to say that it's the same as humans, right? But where they give them a lever with cocaine, and these people hit these mice, they hit the lever, and they'll do it to the point of death. They won't eat, they won't exercise, and they'll die. They've also done this study with a lever of LSD. Now, LSD is dimethyltryptamine, So DMT. So it's not the same molecule as that which is in mushrooms, although it's psilocybin, but it's very similar. And mice will hit that lever once and they'll never hit it again.
Interesting.
Yeah,
they're fast learners.
yeah, exactly.
They get everything from that first time. Now that's fascinating. If you were to kind of sum up in kind of like one sentence or one phrase what this journey has given you, how would you sum it up?
I'd say it gave me love. I would really describe it that way. You experience love immensely. The first journey as well as the second. The first journey, I mean, there was a point as well that I died, which I was transported back to World War II. I was tasked with, I remember this very vividly. I was tasked with killing a mother and her daughter, shooting them in the back of the head. This was, war atrocities that have actually happened in World War II. And I felt myself shaking, convulsing, crying. And I because I knew that I wasn't going to do that. I was not going to kill a complete stranger. And so that was, for me, it was love that was willing to face death, and also realizing that it could outlast death. And for me, that was the big insight of that journey, was if love is that powerful, that universal, then how can that not be a sufficient enough energy to power your business? And that was the major insight of the first one. And the second one, of course, feeling that immense love as well, was also absolutely beautiful. And so for me, it was realizing that, like, this universe, this infinite intelligence that we're all part of, that is in turn us, is love. And when we pass through life and we take on all these things that, all these programmings, all these misconceptions, these fears, these worries, these anxieties, like, that's worldly. That is not who we are. We're born from love. We are love, and this is love, and it's right there. It's like literally like a millisecond away. You could see that when you look at a tree. You could see that when you look at an animal. You see that when you sit still for a while. And so I would say that was, for me, the most beautiful piece, is realizing that, as well as feeling that I'm no longer fearful of death, because, as I mentioned before, I was very much agnostic, at times atheist, and I don't feel that way anymore. I feel like this thing, whatever this thing is, it continues, and each of our energies, like, just, it's an infinite thing.
I mean, it sounds like a really profound, really fascinating experience. In terms of, like, what next for you, do you think that experience has affected your priorities in life and your priorities in your business? Or is it kind of like, well, you've taken the wisdom from that experience, but you're still on the same road that you were on before?
I feel like I'm integrating still. And so let's say, like, certain things that previously would have produced fear, like, maybe they're still present, but I'm not feeling that fear and anxiety, which means that, obviously, if you're a business owner or even just a person passing through life, you're going to be faced with decisions that you have to make. If you're making decisions from a place of fear, like, that can lead down a very treacherous road. Whereas instead, if you're making decisions from a position of love, I venture to guess that you're probably going to have a better experience, just in terms of reciprocity, even just from that point of reference. So I'm still integrating experiences, but I have noticed a difference. I've noticed a desire to want to connect with people that I haven't connected in a long time. I've realized that I feel much more open to another person having a different perspective than my own. People might hear this thing and say, okay, he's just this drug induced, like, crazy hippie looking dude. And I'm fine with that, whereas otherwise I might feel like a criticism. And so as far as, like, the business aspect of it goes, like, I really wanted to be more conscientious. I think there's elements that I remember back to a key point of this journey, which is things like, you're God too. And in those moments that I'm feeling like a little bit more more tired, let's say, is like, it becomes that limitless aspect. It becomes like kind of like the Matrix or the Matrix Resurrections, where I feel like, what if I'm like Neo? What if I am God too? Like, what if I perceive the world this way? And there is a little element of fear there, right? Because you go, oh shit, like, what is this? Like, what is reality? You know, if you can actually do everything that or whatever you set your mind to. And so in those moments, I return back to some of those insights, you know, and I believe the insights are still pouring forth. Like, I'll still have something that, like, I haven't fully integrated, and then it'll come through as a meaning that I make on top of it. And but I have seen some differences. Yeah.
Wow, amazing. If someone's listening to this and they want to learn more about you, or maybe connect with you, or learn more about what you do in the area of video, what's the best way that they can reach out and connect?
Yeah, they can head over to my website. It's diegocassina.com. Otherwise, they can head over to my Instagram and shoot me a message that way. It's DiegoCassina_official. And then, just shoot me an email or shoot me a personal message, and happy to discuss anything that we took today, or otherwise, business related. I will say one thing is, this journey that I went on is not for everybody, and clearly, like, I needed some healing, or I felt I needed healing. But do your research. There are some people where it is not recommended or advisable to go on these kind of journeys. If you're schizophrenic, if you're prone to psychotic breaks, if your bearings on reality are already a little bit loose, probably not the best decision, and so definitely I would recommend doing it guided and not doing this recreationally. But yeah, ultimately, doing what you feel serves you and helps you most is, I think, the best for everybody involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a very personal decision, which you're absolutely right, is not going to be right for everyone. And even if they think it is right, you're right, they're going to need to do fairly detailed research, so they're finding the right, setting, the right assistance, the right kind of understanding of what's involved in, including risks, because not everyone has an amazing experience. Diego, it's been an absolute honor to have you on the show today. Thank you so much. It's been great.
Thank you, man. Thank you so much, Adam.
And to you at home, thanks for joining me on Modern Mindset. See you again soon for more.
Thank you for listening to Modern Mindset with Adam Cox. To automatically receive the latest episodes, please subscribe. If you'd like to support the show, please share this episode with just one friend you think it could help. And if this episode helped you, please leave us a 5-star review. Modern Mindset, picking the brains of the world's leading minds to help you unlock yours.